Hi everybody, thanks for coming. This is our third session in our seed saving workshop series. Just a reminder, we're doing four online sessions and then we're gonna have two in-person sessions in Lee this fall. And Hannah is here again to present. And I will talk to Hannah. Thank you so much, Hannah.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. Good to be here and glad to see some people joining. I am going to focus today on, we've done a lot of background information and done a lot of providing definitions and gone over some botany in the last two lectures. I am going to review a few things and build on that as we go forward today. All of the crops I will be talking about are ones that we call dry seed crops. That means that when the seed is mature and ready to harvest, it is from fruit that is dry and that the seed, it's primarily referring to the fruit that the seed is being harvested from. Um, I am going to cover the five families that you see on the screen here. And Bill Braun, who you met in the first lecture, he is going to be presenting in August and he's going to be covering wet seeded crops and also two additional dry seeded crops. Those dry seeded crops that he will cover in August are the brassicas and the Asteraceae. Asteraceae are like your lettuces and your chicories and things like that. So he will cover those then. But I'm going to get us set up with some more terminology today, and just expanding on a few things we talked about last time, and then going into each of these groups and just considerations you need to be aware of when you're planning to save seed from these five groups. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about this concept of staying true. Um, I You can be a plant breeder and save seeds from plants where you have absolutely no idea what's going to happen when you grow those seeds out. And those are topics for another day and a totally different type of workshop. So I just want to clarify that what we really want to focus on here is the information you guys need to save seed from plants, and you have an expectation that when you grow those plants the next year, they're going to stay true to the plants you save seeds from the beginning. For example, if you are saving seeds from a Brandywine tomato this year, you will grow those seeds next year and it will give you fruit that is the Brandywine tomato fruit, and the plants will be very similar to the ones you grew the year before and saved seeds from. Um, I know that in my last talk and in Bill's talk, we were talking about, yeah, and you could save seed from F1 hybrids and you can save seeds from these and unravel a whole plant breeding project. But moving forward, I really just want to make it clear we're talking about how to save pure seeds. And there are two really important considerations that you're going to need to take. We talked a little bit about these last time, and I just want to expand on that again today. So, one is population size. So, that's the amount of plants from the variety of vegetable that you're trying to save seed from. So, the amount of plants, if you're growing um some like provider bush beans and you want to save seed from that, how many individual provider bush bean plants do you need to plant and save seed from. So that's what I'm talking about as far as that goes. I am not talking about, say, common bean in general, where maybe in your garden you're growing Provider and Tavera and Marble of Venice and all these other types. I'm talking about the amount of plants in one single variety. And it's important because you some plants are very susceptible to what's called inbreeding depression. And if you don't save seed from enough members of that population, then over time, and you may not see this in the first year, but over time, if you continue to save seed from not enough plants, you're going to begin to see a lot of deleterious traits popping up in those plants. The plants will become weaker, more disease susceptible. You'll see germination rates dropping in the seeds that you're trying to produce. And there are all sorts of recommendations that exist on the population sizes, and you'll see a wide variety. So in some of the seed saving books, you will see recommendations on the amount of the population size needed just to produce viable seed. Just to make sure you're getting enough pollination by enough individuals of that variety and to just make healthy seed that will actually germinate and grow for you the next year. Then you'll see recommendations for the amount of plants you should grow to maintain that variety. And that goes a little bit beyond just trying to get viable seed. So, you will need to grow out more plants in order to maintain that variety. And then there's the next level of genetic preservation. If you're really, really trying to, maybe you're trying to save seed from a very rare plant, maybe it's an heirloom that only came down from your grandmother, and you really want to make sure that you have very healthy, genetically robust seed. We call that genetic preservation. And the population size necessary to achieve genetic preservation of a single variety will be more. You'll need to grow more individuals than you would if you're just trying to maintain a variety, and certainly far more than if you are only just trying to get viable seed. Okay, and then the other consideration that you will need to make is isolation distance. So I talked a little bit about isolation distance last time, and Bill touched on it in the first talk. Um, but it is worth talking about again. And right now, I'm just going to talk about isolation distance in general. And then as I get into those five different groups of plants, I will talk about far more specific isolation distances needed for those particular types of plants that we'll talk about later on in the talk today. So isolation distance is the distance you want between the group, that population of plants that you're trying to save seed from. It's that group and the distance that you're growing any other members that of that plant species that could cross-pollinate with the group you're trying to save seed from. So if you want to grow Provider bush beans and save seed from it, you'll want to keep those plants in a group in one portion of your farm. And then if you wanted to grow Marble of Venice, which is another member of the common bean gene species that could cross-pollinate readily with Provider, there's a minimum distance that you want to keep those other plants away from your Provider bean.
Class cleaner handy.
Sorry, was there a question?
No.
Sorry, I can't quite see if people are trying to ask questions.
I think
Okay, so last time when we talked a little bit about the botany of different plants, we talked about ones that self-pollinate, and we talked about ones that have to cross-pollinate, and we mentioned that there's a whole spectrum um, uh, in between those. So isolation distance very much has everything to do with whether a plant can reliably self-pollinate versus cross-pollinating. And so for self-pollinating plants such as beans and peas and lettuce and barley and oats, those types of plants, you need an isolation distance that may only be a few feet, a minimum of 15 feet up to around 150 feet. And this depends on several things. So, if your farm, if it's a conventional farm and maybe you're doing a lot of weed control and you don't really have a lot of pollinator borders, and maybe you don't have a lot of like ecological diversity on your farm, you probably can have a smaller isolation distance because you don't have a lot of insects that will be carrying pollen around. But if you are growing in, a genetically diverse regenerative farming system where you have lots of pollinators and lots of, you're doing a lot to improve the ecological health of your farm, you'll have a lot more insects that can carry pollen further. And so your isolation distances will need to be further apart. And the population size follows the same trend. So for your sulfurs, you're looking at 15 to 150 feet between that group you're trying to save seeds from and any other um, vegetables you might be growing that can cross-pollinate with that. And then the population size. So for some of the self-pollinating plants, you really only need to save seed from one plant if you're trying to get viable seed. But remember on the last slide, I said you just to get viable seed, but if you want to maintain the variety, you might want to grow 15 or 20 plants. And if you're trying to do genetic preservation, you actually want to grow more, even though this is a self-pollinating plant. Um, so we're going to get into a lot more specifics. Don't worry about trying to digest this table. But I just wanted to just hit it home that this population size and isolation distance is really going to be very important so that you're saving seeds that are true to the variety that you think you're saving seed from. Are there any questions about that? All right. So I'm just going to continue the review here, and this is going to play out more when we talk about some of the groups of plants later this afternoon. So and we have two big groups of plants. We have our annuals, and these are plants that complete their life cycle in 1 year. And that means you plant the seed for that plant and you can save seed from that plant by the end of the growing season. Um, and when you're planning, last lecture we talked all about planning for saving seeds. You want to make sure that when you're planting an annual plant you want to save seed from, that plant really needs to stay in the same place all season. And as a farmer, when you're planting out your rows, a lot of times when we're trying to plant crops that we're getting harvest from, and then maybe we're going to do a midsummer succession planting of a different crop in that row, if you're trying to save seed, you're not going to do that. You're going to leave that plant in place. And so you just want to make sure that you plan for that and you make room for that on your farm. And you know that, section B, row 7 is going to be planted with calendula for the entire season. And you need to plan your succession plantings and harvests around that. And then we have biennials, and biennials complete their life cycle over a 2-year period. So in year 1, you plant the seeds and those plants grow and grow and grow. Typically, biennials have what's called rosette growth. So you just see a lot of leaves, luscious, beautiful leaves that the plant produces. And its main goal to in year 1 is to put as much energy into its root system. So think of like your beets or onions or garlic or even Swiss chard, things like that. So that root system is what will overwinter. All the leaves die back, and then that root needs to overwinter, and then it also needs to go through a process called vernalization in order to complete its life cycle the next year. So overwintering, that is a whole thing. And there are a few ways that you can do it. And if you remember back to the last talk, I talked about really know your crop, know the crop you're working with. And that means knowing how cold hardy it is. If you're growing carrots or onions or beets, you may want to actually grow those roots out in that first year and leave them in the ground and just let them come out of dormancy in the spring and make seed in that exact same spot on your farm during year 2. But you might also not want to do that. And so the other strategy is let the plants grow during year 1. And then in the fall, as the temperatures drop and the day length shortens and the plant starts going into dormancy, you want to let it do that. It's receiving all sorts of physiological cues from nature, and it is doing everything it needs to go dormant in order to survive the winter. And then you want to dig up those roots, and then you want to be storing them for the winter. And planting them, maybe you want to plant them somewhere else. So if you're farm and you're growing out all of the roots in one row, but you know that maybe that field is going to be fallow the following year and you're going to be doing cover crops and trying to do some soil health, you're not going to want to leave those roots there. And so then you would have to actually dig them up, plan for storing them over the winter so that they don't rot. And then you also want to make sure that you know what they require to vernalize. And vernalize, the root word vernal means spring. And if you think of late winter, early spring, especially in our climate, but thinking globally where all of these different plants evolved, there's usually a series of, you'll have a little bit of a thaw, and then it'll freeze again, and then it will thaw and it will rain, and maybe the ground starts to thaw a little bit, and then you have another freeze. So that whole process is vernalization. And when you think about if you're trying to grow native seeds and everyone tries to do their winter sowing in those silly milk jugs, you just really want to plant the seeds in the fall and let nature vernalize them for you. But our biennial root crops have the same requirement for vernalization. Some of those roots need to be kept at 50 degrees for 8 weeks. Some need to be kept at 35 degrees for 10 weeks. And I shared some books titles with you guys last time. And those books contain that vernalization information for each crop that you might consider working with. I will try to touch on that as we go through some of the biennials today and point out what some of those vernalization requirements are. But this information is very readily available. So is population size, so is isolation distance. And I am happy to provide that list of books again. There's just three key books. If they're the only books you have on seed production, it will take care of you. So today, in addition to talking of all the crops we're talking about are ones that are dry seeded, we're also going to be talking about some of those are annuals and some of those are biennials. And I will use every opportunity I can to get into some more specific information on overwintering and vernalizing those roots and preparing for transplanting them if they're not ones that you're going to just let stay in the ground over winter and grow out for seed the following year. Any questions about that before we dive into the plant groups? I'll give people a couple seconds to raise their hand if they need to. All right, so I will start with the Fabaceae. So this is the family name for all of the legumes. There are tens of thousands of legumes all over the world. We have about 40 different species that are grown and used in the human diet. And there's a little over 100 species that are commonly grown in agricultural systems, a lot of which are used for soil health building, not necessarily an edible crop. And other varieties are used for forage for some of the animals we might be growing agriculturally to eat, but not necessarily eating those legumes. So the examples of the Fabaceae, we have a few key species. So we have the common bean, Phaseolus vulgaris. Peas, our garden peas, fit into that same um, legume family. Fava beans, southern peas, yard-long beans, scarlet runner beans, lima beans. Those are all different species. So if you're growing one variety of common bean and one variety of fava bean, they're different species from each other and they will not cross-pollinate. So just know that in general, um, it's only varieties within a single species that potentially can cross-pollinate. That applies to all the plants. Plants are very clever, and when you get into some of the solanaceous plants, especially in the peppers, you will have different species that can cross-pollinate each other. But we're not talking about that today. Um, okay, so your beans are typically all annuals, and I'm just talking about the vegetable Fabaceae, the vegetable legumes, those 40 species that we use in the human diet. Obviously, something like a black locust tree is also in the Fabaceae, and it is a perennial. But for today, we're talking about our vegetable Fabaceae, and they are at least in our climate, are annuals. And they are dry seeded. that means that when, and we'll go through a few more pictures of this, but when the seed is mature, that seed pod, which is the fruit, is dry. And um, the flowers are perfect. They are self-compatible, so they can very, very easily self-pollinate. But there is also the potential for cross-pollination, especially if you have a lot of bumblebee activity at your farm. So, uh, of all the different types of beans that we saw in that list, um, isolation distance for common beans is around 20 feet. So that means if you're growing your common bean of one variety, you want to keep that group about 20 feet away from any other common beans in your garden. But for something like your fava beans or your um, lima beans, your runner beans, they outcross a lot more readily, and you may need 100 feet if you're trying to save seeds from a scarlet runner bean of one variety and you want to grow other scarlet runner beans. You probably want to keep them closer to 100 feet apart. Even though they are self-pollinating, bees love these flowers and they can carry that pollen. Um, Now, beans being really reliably self-pollinating, you can just save seed from one plant, and that seed will germinate for you next year. But if you really want to make sure that that seed you're saving stays true to type and that you um, resist having some inbreeding depression in your population, you really probably want to save seeds from closer to 15, 20, or even 25 plants. So after you have grown a nice crop, I want to just pause here and make sure that we also hit the idea home of what is mature. So typically, when we eat vegetables that are grown on a plant, we're actually most often eating vegetables that aren't actually physiologically ripe. They are what we call market. They're ripe for market, and but that doesn't necessarily mean that the fruit or the seeds are mature. And so beans are a really good example of that. Most of our crops that we're going to talk about are good examples of that. If this was a provider bush bean that you were trying to save seed from, this is not the stage that you would eat it. You would actually eat it several weeks before it's ready to harvest seed from. And, cucumbers, we're going to hit on all of this as we talk about all the different types of plants. But to save seeds from your beans and your peas, all of it, you want to let those seed pods keep growing, and then they'll eventually start to look dry and they will begin to dry and turn brown. And that is when the seed is at its maximum, the seed is ripe. And that fruit is actually physiologically ripe. And that's when you will look at starting to think about harvesting those seeds so that you can save them. In New England, this gets a little tricky, and this applies to really all of the dry seeded crops, in that usually by the time these fruits and seeds are ripe, physiologically ripe, we're getting into August where we start getting much higher humidity. It starts to rain. We have decreasing day length, and so plants tend to stay wetter longer. And so you can really start needing to worry about whether you have disease and mold, things like that, forming on these seed pods and getting into the seed pods and affecting the seeds. So these might be plants that you may need to plan to put some row cover on to prevent that. Or if the seeds are starting to ripen and you know that you've got rain in the forecast 4 or 5 days out, you might want to harvest those sooner than later. Um, and typically the way you harvest the beans is you want to wait till about 70 or 80% of the pods are ripe on the plant. And if you're doing this on a large scale, you would go through, you would undercut all of the plants, let them dry down for about a day in the field, and then rake them into windrows onto tarps and pull them into a drier place to cure for another several days before trying to extract the seeds from them. When I'm saving beans from plants at home, I just watch the plants and as individual pods ripen, I just pull them off the plant, but that's usually because I'm only trying to get a handful or so of seeds. You want to pay attention to make sure that the that it's dry out when you're doing this. It's very easy. So um, processing the seed crop, you want to go through what's called threshing, and that is literally just beating up the plant material to get the seed pods to break open and have the seeds fall out of that. Um, and I do want to mention that if you know that you have some pests that are on your bean crops, you don't want to put those seeds into storage, especially if it's something that's been laying eggs, like a seed, like a weevil. They can really wreak havoc on your seed collection, and these insects lay their eggs in the summer and the fall, and then the eggs, as you dutifully are storing your seeds for the winter, the eggs will hatch out and the larvae will eat your seeds. For something like beans, you can very easily take care of this by freezing those seeds for about 3 days before you put them into storage, and that will actually kill off the eggs and kill off any insects or larvae that might be present. Um, and this is just a picture of some friends of mine. Just they have beans laid out on a tarp. They have the tarp folded over it, and then they're just literally dancing on the tarp to loosen the seeds from the seed pods. All right, so the Apiaceae, we're getting into another plant family. The crops we'll talk about are carrots, parsnips, and celery slash celeriac. This is a picture of an angelica plant, but all in the same family. All right. Excuse me while I take a drink. So the Apiaceae, all of these plants are biennial. So they are going to grow, grow, grow the first year, put tons of energy into their root system. And as soon as they overwinter and come out of dormancy, they put all of their energy into producing flowers and fruits and seeds. And they are a dry-seeded crop. Um, and in general, these are flowers that can potentially self-pollinate, but these plants are really sensitive to inbreeding depression. And so one of the main strategies that this plant group uses is called protandry, and we talked about that a bit in the last lecture, but quickly, what that means is that the pollen-bearing part of the plant will mature before the egg-bearing part of that flower. And so that allows the pollen to be received by other flowers that have opened nearby. And so here's a picture from my garden this morning, and I have some Queen Anne's lace, which is Daucus carota, that is carrot and can very easily cross-pollinate with any carrots you're trying to save seed from. But these are two flowers from two different plants right beside each other. And so the pollen on one of those flowers will be able to pollinate the egg-bearing portion of the other flower, but not the flower that it was born on. These are very readily insect pollinated, and that pollen can be carried for quite a long distance. So this is a parsnip seed crop, and so there's a few considerations for growing out these plants. The Apiaceae tend to be enormous plants when they're producing seed, and you want to make sure that you've planned for that ahead of time and that you've got stakes in the ground and ready to support those plants so they don't fall over. But you need very long isolation distances, sometimes up to 2 miles. And so if it's a very small farm or you're just trying to save seeds from these plants in your backyard, you really only want to be growing out one variety at a time that you're saving seed from. And also, the more that because these are susceptible to inbreeding depression, yes, you could save seed from 5 plants, but I would not do that more than once. You really want more closer to 100, 150. And then again, if you're really going for that genetic preservation of a variety, you want to save seed for closer to 200 plants. So I'm going to use carrots as a good example for talking about overwintering and vernalization. So you certainly could grow carrots and let them mature in the fall, just put 8 to 10 inches of mulch over the carrots, and most of them will probably overwinter right there in place. And then in the spring, gently uncover them and allow them to come out of dormancy and put up their flowers and just stay right in place. And that's actually exactly what I did in this case in this picture here. These are parsnips actually, but they grew and in year one, right exactly where in year two they're trying to produce seed. And I planned for that and made sure that I had room at my farm for those plants to do that. So you certainly can do that. Parsnips are a little more winter hardy than carrots, but there are a lot of carrot varieties that are very winter hardy. And so that's an option. Oftentimes, though, people like to dig up the carrot roots and take a look at them. You don't want to be saving seeds from carrots that have really terrible misshapen roots and don't have very good eating quality. And so, if and so in that case, you would want to dig up all of your carrots. You want to take a good look at the carrots and select, 100 or so roots that you're going to want to put into storage and that you're going to want to plant somewhere else the following year to make seed. And I'll just mention that If you want to plant out 100 roots the following year, you probably want to try to save 150 roots because um, you don't know what's going to happen in storage, and it happens all the time that even if you very carefully try to store the roots, um, you'll have a certain percentage of them rot in storage and not make it to planting out the next year. So, one way that we prepare carrot roots to store for the winter and is called preparing stecklings. And I have a picture of it on the next page. It's really just a fancy name for carrot roots that you have prepared for storing properly over winter. So you want to just brush the soil off. You really don't want to introduce water to the soil that's on the root itself because you are just asking for a lot of pathogens, especially in the fungus realm, to start growing. And then you um, as you pull the carrot root, you actually want to get all of the leaves off. And so you're going to cut the whole crown of leaves off the plant, but you want to leave about a quarter of an inch of the greens. You don't want to cut the top of the carrot off because that's the growing point for next year. So you don't want to do that. And there's a picture that shows what I'm talking about. And then you actually typically cut the end, the tip of the carrot off. So the steckling itself that we're preparing is usually around 4 or so inches long, and that's about it. So you're going to want to cut that tip off, let it dry, and then a lot of people just take 5-gallon buckets, put nice clean sand in those buckets, moisten it, but not, you don't want standing water in there. And that's a really good place for the carrots to spend the winter in, and that will go into your walk-in cooler, or if you have a root cellar, someplace that stays above freezing but below 40 degrees, that is a perfect place to overwinter your carrot roots. So here at vernalization, you really need 10 to 12 weeks at or below 40 degrees, but above 30 to 35 degrees. So after the overwintered, you need them to go through this vernalization period. So here we're preparing the steckling. In picture A, you'll see what I'm talking about removing the leaves of the plant, but leaving about a quarter of an inch. And then in pictures B and C, you'll see how we're actually continuing to clean up that top of the plant. You want to get as much of the base of the leaves off as possible. But in picture D, you'll see how we actually have left, it's kind of a conical shape um, of the base of where all the leaves were growing. And then in picture E, you'll see what I meant by cutting the tip of the carrot off and really just leaving like a 4-inch long section that you'll let dry, let that cure, and then get it into those buckets of moist sand. So I also want to talk a little bit about now that you've overwintered them and you've grown them out in the second year and they're starting to flower, what are we looking at here? And so this picture shows um, and these, again, these are my Queen Anne's lace, but they have just come into bloom. So the flowers that you see are the first flowers that these plants have put up this year. But if you look below those top open white flowers, you'll see buds coming and opening up. You want to pay attention to that because the healthiest seed that you're going to have on those plants is going to come from those very first flowers. And so a lot of people will actually cut a lot of those secondary and tertiary flowers off the plants and just let those primary seed heads continue to grow and mature. And this is going to help you at the end of the year when you're trying to collect those seeds, because it actually takes a long time for these seeds to mature on the plant. And so um, if you're letting some of those later flowers develop into seed heads, you may actually not get ripe seed from those, and you'll just be wasting your time saving seeds from those and not having anything that's going to grow the next year. Um, when you know, how do you know that these seeds are ripe? The seed head is going to start to look like this. The seeds are going to turn this beautiful mahogany brown, and that whole seed head, all the little stems under each of the flowers, is now totally dry, and these are very brittle. And when you harvest these, you really can just use your hands to crush them, and the seeds usually fall right off. And again, when we do the in-person workshops this fall, we're going to talk more about threshing and winnowing and cleaning seeds. So I'm not going to go through that right now, but it is important to do the best you can to separate the nice clean seeds from any residual plant material. Celery, celeriac, really the same kind of considerations. And I just love this picture of celeriac, but very, very similar to carrots. Really the same isolation distances and the same population sizes and the same vernalization requirements. Um, and again, the same considerations for what to look for in that seed head. One thing to keep in mind is that celery and celeriac, those seeds actually very readily shatter off of the seed head. And so that really speaks to your timing for harvesting those seeds. You want to make sure you're getting them before all the seed actually just falls on the ground. And again, these seeds are ripening in August and September when we're getting a lot of storms. You could have a real, even if it doesn't have rain, you could get a windstorm come in. And for something like celery and celeriac, can really knock a lot of those seeds off. And you go out the next day, you might have been looking at it on one day saying, wow, these look really great. They're almost ready to harvest. And then you go out the next day and all the seeds have been blown off the plant and on the ground. So for celery and celeriac, you may harvest the plants a little bit earlier than you would for carrots, and that is something you harvest the entire plant and then you bring it inside somewhere where you can capture any seed that might fall off the plant as it is ripening, and just finishing up with its maturing. But you do want to make sure you're planting for rodents because rodents love it when you bring these crops into your barns to finish ripening. All right, any questions about that? All right, I'm going to get into the Amaranthaceae. There are a lot of plants in this family. These are your goosefoot family. There's a lot of really delicious edible weeds in our area in New England that are part of this family. But this also includes our beets, our Swiss chard, and spinach, which are the crops I'm going to talk about. And it is important to note that beets and Swiss chard are the same species. And so if you are trying to save seeds, from, if you'd like to save seeds from both of these, you might want to alternate the years that you're doing it because they do have fairly large population size requirements and isolation distance requirements. And so one good way to provide that isolation is with time. So just timing how you're growing your seed crops. And like I said, you could grow beets for seed one year and plan to be doing your Swiss chard seed production the following year. So these are biennials, just like your Apiaceae, and you want to do everything you can to grow the healthiest plants in that first year. It's really critical for all of your biennials. If you're planning to save seed from them, you want the root that they're creating in that first year to be as strong and healthy as possible. And so, doing your best to support those plants in that first year is critical. Um, Typically, these plants they are susceptible to inbreeding depression, but the flowers on one plant really are not able to self-pollinate at all. Of course, there's always exceptions to this, but in general. Um, it must cross-pollinate with flowers from another plant. And typically, when you have a plant like that, that also means you need to consider a larger population size to make sure. And these flowers are often, when pollinated, you will see insects visiting these flowers, but the pollen is very light and very, very small, and it's very easily carried on the wind for long distances. So why it will have those large isolation distance requirements. So after you've grown your roots out in the first year, um, and you're planning in the second year to grow your seed crop, um, again, minimum of 5 plants just for viable seed. I don't think I would ever only plant 5 plants to save seed from in this family. Um, if I really only wanted viable seed and didn't care about maintaining the variety and certainly didn't care about genetic preservation, I would still save seed from at least 30 seeds, 30 plants. Um, and in general, you really should be planning for saving seed from 150 to 200 plants. And when you plant these out, they're going to have at least a foot between them within a row. So, you need to plan for it to have the space to do that. You can trim when you're preparing to overwinter your roots. Really, it's sort of the same process as carrots, except you're not going to cut the bottoms off. But if you look at these pictures side by side, you'll see two beets. The beet on the left has too much of the leaf material left on it, and a lot of that will start to rot in storage, and it will lead to a lot of problems. So you really want to clean it up so it looks more like the picture on the beet on the right in that picture. If you wanted to try to look at the quality of the beet before you store it, you could do what's called cheeking, and that is actually just taking a small slice off of the side of the beet, and that allows you to look inside. You could give it a quick taste test just to make sure it's actually a beet you want to be saving seed from, that you want to be in that population you're going to grow out the next year. Again, if you do that, make that little cut, you want to let it dry for a day or so, so that it's not oozing any moisture when you put it into storage for the winter. So beet plants, again, they get quite large. They also get quite floppy. So you want to make sure that you're able to stake them. And it takes a long time for beet seeds to mature. And using a high tunnel with the sides rolled up for the summer is a really nice way to ensure a much higher quality of seeds that is being produced. It will really help keep the moisture off of these plants and really reduce the amount of fungus that and mold that can infect the plants. You want to be looking really closely. Again, they don't quite have the same flower arrangement that the carrots and the Apiaceae do, but you also want to pay attention again to those primary shoots, the first shoots that come out and start flowering. And oftentimes, seed growers will allow that first shoot to form and then cut a lot of the secondary and tertiary shoots that form, and that allows the plant to put a ton of energy into the seed in the center on that primary um, flower stalk, and you'll get a much higher quality seed in that way. If you're trying to grow a ton of beet seeds, say you have a contract with a seed company, um, you'll want to grow a lot more plants if you're going to be pruning off those secondary and tertiary shoots. But if you are planning to sell those seeds and growing them for a seed company, you'll get a much higher quality product, and you'll be able to actually get a higher price for that seed crop. And so again, we'll get more into processing and storing the seeds when we do the in-person workshops in the fall. I'm just going to take another sip. Okay. So spinach, this is the last crop I think that I will cover today because we are just about at time. Um, so spinach is actually an annual and it completes its life cycle generally in 1 year, ish. And it's one that you want to plan to have in the ground all, from the late spring throughout the summer. And in the fall, when day length shortens and you start getting some of those cold nights, that will actually vernalize the plant and stimulate it to go into flowering. Um, these plants are dioecious, which means they're separate pollen-bearing and egg-bearing plants, completely separate plants. These are wind pollinated. You will see some curious insects on these plants from time to time, but the pollen is kind of like pine pollen. It's just so light and there's so much of it, and it is carried over really long distances, even on very light breezes. So they require at least a mile between um, of isolation distance. And again, a minimum of 10 plants for viable seed. And really, part of that is because some of those plants aren't going to produce seed. Some of those are only producing pollen. And so if you plant 10, you can be assured that at least a few of those are actually the seed-bearing plant. Again, 120 to 200 plants is better if you really want to maintain that variety. Um, and again, we'll go over the harvesting and processing of the seeds in the fall. And um, I'm going to stop there because we are at time and see if there are any questions. And we will mark this stopping point and we'll pick up with the next set of crops in August.
Anybody have any questions? Okay, well, if not, oh,
Lisa, you can come off mute and just ask your question. That would be lovely.
I'm sorry. That was so painful to try to get it to the mute. Okay.
You did it.
I did it. Okay. So, yes, my yard is identified as a farm. But am I a farm that sells anything to anyone? No. Okay. So, maybe you can just give me an idea if I'm understanding. So I am very excited to be able to start to save seeds. I have a lot of flowers. I have a 50 by 100 pollinators garden. I keep bees.
Beautiful.
Um, if I am understanding for the vegetables,
Hmm.
I might be better off thinking that every other year I might buy my seeds since I don't have the numbers that you're speaking of to have that variety so it won't have those issues. Is that kind of like I'm understanding right?
Yeah, depending on the plant group. I mean, if you're trying to save seed from, your beans or your peas, and you really only need 15 or so plants, um, it doesn't take a lot of room to grow those, so that would be fine. But if you are trying to do seed production in beets or spinach or something like that, I think that would be a good strategy is to, continue to buy your seed from time to time, and you'll know when you have um, not planted enough and not saved seed from enough plants when you go to plant that seed the following year and have some problems. But if you alternate every other year or maybe every 2 years in between saving seed, you should be okay with some of those smaller population sizes.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Especially
Thank
when
you.
you get into like tomatoes and peppers and some of those ones that are in the middle of that spectrum, like you don't I mean when we get to things like corn and spinach, you really need to have the big population sizes. But when you're talking about some of the other ones, you can get away with smaller for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't grow any peas or beans. I don't like them.
Well, and if you have questions about specific crops, you can email me or email Elena and she'll put you in touch with me and we can talk about the specific plants you're talking about.
Okay.
And I can walk you through, there's exceptions everywhere. And so, don't lose hope.
Okay.
And I can walk you through maybe specific crop
All
types.
right.
Right.
I have another question if you don't mind. So,
Yeah.
I am growing carrots. We're going to decide whether this will be my last year for growing them or not,
Oh, no.
since I have not yet been successful. However, I have a whole new system in place,
Mhm.
and I really have soil that is much better irrigated with coconut coir in it and things like that.
Nice.
So, if I'm successful, I understand how to store them.
Okay.
And so what you're saying is you really won't get seeds from them until the second year.
Correct. And you don't want to get seed from them the second year. So, what sometimes happens is you'll plant your carrots in the spring and they might be growing. And then, if you plant them like too early, and this happens with a lot of crops, you can trick them into flowering that first year, and you don't want that. If they did, that is not a genetic trait you want to preserve. So yes, if it's supposed to be a biennial, you want to make sure you're getting seed from it in that second year.
And I guess I've never seen those. It looks like Queen Anne's lace,
Yeah,
right?
Queen Anne's lace is
Is in fact a carrot.
is Daucus carota. Yes, that is what modern carrots evolved from over the past 1,000
Oh
years or
my
so.
God. So I have a couple of bonus ones that have flowered into Queen Anne's lace, and I'm like leaving them. So I could effectively pull them up at the end of the season
The
and perhaps,
flowered?
oh, I was thinking, would a carrot actually be down in the soil from it?
Yes, but the thing is that it uses all the energy from that root, and so the eating quality is typically very, very poor once
Okay.
plant has started to flower. Yeah. They
All
usually
right.
woody and pithy and they'll smell like a carrot, but they probably won't taste or feel.
Okay, but I can get seed from it then this year on those bonus ones.
Well, if are they ones that overwintered from last year or ones that you planted this year and decided?
I didn't plant them at all there. They just
Oh,
showed
it's
up.
literally Queen Anne's lace.
Oh, then it's
Yeah.
not the same thing.
Yeah, I'm gonna say it's literally Queen Anne's lace, and yes, you can eat Queen Anne's lace, but I wouldn't. I mean, unless you tr want to grow Queen Anne's lace, and I mean there are people who buy seed for Queen Anne's lace, but I don't. I wouldn't save seed from that.
No. Okay, very good then. All right. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
I'm learning a lot.
Oh, good. Thank you.
All right. I'll see you next month.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Any other questions? Good. Um, okay, well, thank you so much, Hannah.
Yeah, you're welcome.
See everybody next time.
All right, sounds good. Bye.